Hi, everybody. We are just waiting a minute to make sure that everybody is in the room before we get this webinar started. Okay, I can see there's still a few more people coming in, but I think we should just get started. Hi and welcome. My name is Christopher, and I'm a project advisor at the North Sea Region Program. And for this webinar, we are going to address the final adjustment change. And together with me to deliver the content, I have my colleague, Annemike.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar.
Thank you so much. So before we get started, there's a few technicalities that we would like to take you through. First of all, there's to the right, in the right-hand side of the picture, there's a chat function. The thing is that during this webinar, it will only be Annemike and I who can use our cameras, and it will only be us who can use our microphones. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat function. And remember to put a question mark after your question, because then the system will recognize that it's a question, and then we will be able to pick up on them later. The thing is, when we are done with the intervention from our side, then we will have this Q&A session at the end, where we'll then pose the questions and we will answer them one by one. And should you miss any important parts of this webinar, then it will be recorded and it will be posted on our website, so you can watch it over and over again as many times as you feel for. I think that is the practicalities. And before we get really into it, we have a small survey where we just ask who you are and where you're from. So please feel free to answer the questions, and also be aware that perhaps you cannot see all the questions at once. There's 2-3 questions, and you can scroll on the screen.
Yeah, so please fill in the 3 questions on your screen. So, Christopher, I can only see the participant side of the survey, so I cannot show the results right now.
I'm not going to end the voting right now. I can see that the majority of the participants have answered now, so let's just give it a few more seconds, and then I'm pretty sure that we will have everybody who wants to answer it being able to answer it. Okay, so I'm going to end the voting now. Thank you so much. Annemike, will you take us through the answers?
Yes, of course. And I can see from the first questions that we have a lot of people from all of the countries covered by our region, except from Sweden and Norway. Well, welcome to all of you. I can also see 2 participants from other countries, which is interesting. We're happy to hear where you are actually from. We can see that there are quite some lead beneficiaries and beneficiaries joining this webinar, and 1 FLC. And regarding the third question, it is like we expected. Many of your projects have been running for quite a while already, and that is why this webinar will be interesting for you, because final adjustment change will be submitted as one of the last steps of your project administration. So please hang on in this webinar, and I'm sure it will be interesting for you. So let's go back to the presentation.
Exactly, because it's also important to mention that it's not only the secretariat who can assist you on questions. You probably already know this, since you are about to finalize your project and you want to learn more about the final adjustment change. But remember, we also have the national contact points that can assist you on a lot of the issues that you might occur. So please find the contact details on our website if you need to. And please bear in mind that there's no contact point for Denmark. So if you have any national related questions, please get a hold of the Secretariat and we will assist you and either answer you directly or find the right people amongst the Danish authorities who can answer your question. So I think, Annemieke, we should just get to it.
Yes, that's right, Christopher. Thank you very much for your introduction. And in your screen, you can now see the topics that we're going to cover today. So I will first start with explaining what exactly a final adjustment change, or FAC as we also call it, what it is. I'll explain you more on when you can submit your final adjustment change, how you can submit your final adjustment change. And lastly, I will also show you what the final adjustment change actually looks like in the OMS. So we'll go on a little tour through the OMS. And please be aware that, as Christopher said, you can already start asking questions in the chat box, but we will cover those questions at the end of the webinar during the Q&A. So what is your final adjustment change? We all know that when we write a project application, we have a very nice plan of what we're going to do, when, and how much we are going to spend for that. But as most of you will already have experienced, this is just a plan, and reality may turn out quite a lot different from what you expected. This can, for example, be because of the corona crisis, which has impacted your project quite a lot, I'm sure. So this is actually the reason why it's possible to submit change requests during your project implementation. When you're nearing the end of your project, your actual expenditure may turn out quite a lot different from what was planned in the application form. And that is the reason why at the end of your project, you will be able to submit a final adjustment change. So what is your final adjustment change? As I said, your final adjustment change can align your budget, your approved budget, with the actual spending of the project. And by doing this, you can make optimal use of your grant. For example, when you spend less money on one of the expenditure items in your application form, you can transfer this budget to another budget line or another beneficiary in order to make optimal use of the budget that is available to you, and plan for spend more money on these activities in order to maximize the impact of your project. So what is important to remember here is that with the final adjustment change, you can only adjust financial aspects of your project. So you can adjust the budget table, you can adjust your budget plan for example, external expertise and services, but it's not possible to adjust any content-related aspects, such as the results, the output indicators, or the deliverables. You cannot adjust that with a final adjustment change. What is also important if you have Norwegian beneficiaries in your project is that it is not possible to transfer budget from a Norwegian beneficiary to a beneficiary of another country. This is because we work in the program with 2 different funding streams, and it's not possible to transfer any budget between those funding streams. So this is something to be aware of if you have a Norwegian beneficiary in your project. So how can I adjust the project budget? There are basically 2 options for this. You can shift budget between the budget lines of one beneficiary, which we also call a minor budget shift, or you can shift budget between different beneficiaries in your project, which we also call major budget shifts. And what's important here is that it's never possible to adjust the total budget of your project. So you should always be sure that the total budget of your project remains the same, although you have maybe shifted budgets between beneficiaries. So in short, the possibilities are similar to what you can do with a major change, if some of you have already submitted that, with the only difference that you can only adjust financial aspects of your project and not any content-related aspects which you are able to adjust with a major change. So then the timeline. When are you able to submit a final adjustment change? It's possible to submit a final adjustment change when the final report is opened by your project advisor. This is then also the only change request you are able to submit. So it's not possible then anymore to submit a minor change or a major change. So as soon as your final report is open, you can only submit a final adjustment change if you want. What is important here is that after your final adjustment change is submitted and approved, the finance reports of the different beneficiaries will be adjusted in line with the newly approved budget tables. So this also means that the beneficiaries are not able to submit their finance reports when the final adjustment change is still open. So how do you submit a final adjustment change? It works very much the same as any other change requests. So the project managing user goes into the system, starts the change request, and enters all details, change items in the change request. And then the project managing user has to ask the authorized signatory of the project to submit the final adjustment change to the joint secretariat. The joint secretariat will then assess the change request and will approve the change request if the project advisor thinks that the changes are sufficiently justified and fit within the scope of the project. This means that there is no approval from the steering committee needed, so there's no written procedure. You don't have to wait 15 working days until the change gets approved. After your project advisor has approved your change request, it can be applied immediately. So what to do if you encounter any difficulties when you're writing your change request? Of course, your first point of contact is always your project advisor. But if you have a purely technical question regarding possibilities in the OMS, it's also possible to get in touch with our OMS help desk by clicking on the help button in the upper right corner of your screen. So at this point, we have another survey ready for you.
Thank you so much, Annemieke, for this nice introduction on the first part. And of course, it's always good. I'm trying to navigate while I'm speaking. Of course, it's always good that once we have heard something, that we just try to remind ourselves what it is that we've just heard, and then we can just, double check if what we heard is in fact also correct. So now we have two questions for you. True or false, after I've submitted the final adjustment change, I have to wait at least 15 days before I can submit the final report. Is that true or false? And then the second question, again, it's a true or false question. If I, as a beneficiary, don't want to change my project budget, can I already submit my last finance report while the final adjustment change is still open? Good question. It's like Jeopardy. So I can see that we already got a lot of responses. Let's just wait a second or two, make sure that we allow everybody to answer. Okay, I think we will end it here. So for the first one, after I've submitted the final adjustment change, I have to wait at least 15 days before I can submit the final report. That's not correct, so job well done, guys. And then for the second one, if I, as a beneficiary, don't want to change my project budget, I can already submit my last finance report while the final adjustment change is still open. That is also a false statement. So really good job, guys. It seems like it was very clear what you told us, Annemieke. Thank you so much. And let's go back to the presentation.
Yes, I'm very happy to hear that most of you had the questions right. If you have any questions, again, please put it in the chat box so we will answer it after the presentations. And so now it's actually time for our tour through the OMS. And we will do that by looking at our test account in the OMS, which you can see here. We have a lot of messages still to be answered. So when you look in the when you log into the OMS, this is what you will see when you enter the changes module. So you click on the changes module here in the left sidebar of your screen. And what you will do then to open a final adjustment change is to click on new change request in the upper right corner. So this is what you will see then. You will have to click on the name of your project, and the OMS already notifies you that the final report is open. So the only possible change request you can submit is the final adjustment change. So we click on the name of the project, and the screen you will see then looks like this. What you will have to fill in here is the title of the change request, which will most probably be something with final adjustment change in the title, and the reason for change. Well, the reason for change is not supposed to be a very long explanation. What you have to fill in here is that you are actually aligning your budget tables with the actual spending of the project, and that it doesn't affect the project results, output indicators, etc. So it's purely to adjust the budget at the end of the project. So when you're ready with this, you click on save, and then you actually enter the change request that looks like this, and you can then enter different change request items. And what we're going to do here as an example is we are going to add some budget for our Swedish beneficiary, and later on we will deduct that from our Danish beneficiary in order to keep the total project budget the same as it was. So first we are going to adjust the Swedish beneficiary's budget by clicking on new request item. And we want to make an adjustment to the D1 budget table in the application form. So we click on D1 budget, and what you will see then is this. You click on the right beneficiary, which is in this case our Swedish beneficiary. You click on next in the following screen, and this is then what you will see. So this is the budget from the Swedish beneficiary as it currently is. So let's say we want to give the Swedish beneficiary some extra budget for the travel and accommodation budget line. So we adjust the number here for travel and accommodation. We increase it with 2,100 euros and click on save. The OMS will then notify you with a couple of messages that you cannot submit your change request yet. First of all, because the total budget of the project has changed, but also because you have to adjust the funding table and the time spending plan table in the application form. So we will skip a couple of steps here. I will not show you how I have to adjust all these things, but in the next screen, you can see we have no error messages anymore. We have actually entered a change request item for the Danish beneficiary to adjust their budget as well, which means the total project budget is now the same as it was. We have adjusted the funding tables, so we are now actually ready to submit our final adjustment change. And as I said before, this needs to be done by the authorized signatory. So the authorized signatory needs to log into the OMS and submit the final adjustment change. Something you shouldn't forget before you submit your final adjustment change is when you increase budget of some beneficiaries, you have to upload a new letter of intent for those beneficiaries, and this should be part of the final adjustment change. So you can upload the new letter of intent in the change request. And secondly, after the final adjustment change is approved and you have shifted budget between beneficiaries, we will also issue a new contract to be signed. So this brings us actually to our next survey, which is about whether you will submit a final adjustment change, because we are actually quite curious to that. Christopher, can you start the survey?
Yes, it is here. So we have 2 questions for you. Do you expect your project will submit a final adjustment change? And then the second one, what kind of change do you expect to request with the final adjustment change? So please let us know. Looks really good. Perfect. I think there's no one else who wants to cast their votes. So I'll just end the voting here. No, there's just one more that got in. Okay, great. Good. So what we see is that almost half of you expect to submit a final adjustment change. And then there's still a proportion of you that is still not entirely sure whether or not you are going to be needing one. And then for the second one, what kind of change do you expect to request with the final adjustment change? Then the majority of you finds it to be necessary with what we would normally refer to as a major change, so shifting budget from one beneficiary to another. And then closely followed by minor changes, so that is adjusting the budget within individual beneficiaries. And we have a couple that says, we don't expect to submit a final adjustment change. And luckily, Annemika, I don't know if you saw this, but luckily no one said that they were going to adjust the targets for outputs, results, and deliverables, which is really good that you didn't answer this, because it's not possible with the final adjustment change, as Annemika already told us. So again, a great job, guys.
Yes.
Annemika?
Yes, this was a little trick question, and I'm happy to see nobody actually wants to change their outputs or results in the final adjustment change, as this is of course not possible. And with this, we are actually finished for this part of the webinar, and we're going over to the Q&A right now. So I can see some questions already came in. Let's publish them.
Yes. What we'll do is we will just take the questions one by one as we have received them. And please feel free to continue posting questions. This is how we learn, both from you, but also how we learn from each other. So I will post the first question.
Yeah, and this question was actually entered in the registration form already ahead of the webinar. And the question is there a budget limit for final adjustments? And I assume what is meant here is whether there is a limit to how much money you can actually transfer between budget lines or between beneficiaries. And strictly speaking, the answer is no, there is no limit. If you make extremely large budget shifts, there may raise some questions with your project advisor. So it may be good to discuss this first before you submit the final adjustment change with your project advisor. But we assess this on a case-by-case basis. And if we think that the budget shifts are within the scope of your project and sufficiently justified, there is not a strict budget limit for your changes in your final adjustment change.
Perfect.
I hope that answers the question. If you have any additions, Christopher, please let me know.
Well, I think it was very clear what you said, Annemika. Straightforward answer. Thank you so much. So let's go to the next one. So this is an example. So if I, an example, have about 10 months, sorry, I'm reading that again. If, for example, I have 10 months before the project ends, oh, sorry about that. I'll just read it straight as it is. If, in example, about 10 months before the project ends, some changes for final adjustments are most likely to be expected, would you recommend a major change or a final adjustment change?
Yeah, this depends a bit. The main thing that should be kept into account here is that when you want to submit a major change, this cannot be done when the report is open. So if there's already a report open, I would go for the final adjustment change. But both options are possible, and I would just highly recommend this to discuss this with your project advisor to see what is most relevant in your specific situation.
Exactly, and perhaps what we could link to this is also the fact that if there are need for small adaptations or changes to activities, then for sure the major change is going to be needed. Otherwise, please adhere to what Annemieke just told us. So I'll take the next one. This must be the one. About budget shifts between EU countries. For a major change, this requires approval of SC, if I'm not mistaken, but not here, apparently allowing for total freedom in this regards. Is there an upper limit to this? Can one, for example, shift 200,000 in budget from a partner to another partner in another country? Annemieke?
Yeah, and you are right. The steering committee is not involved in assessing this change. But we, as project advisors at the Joint Secretariat, will of course take a look at it and assess whether it's in the scope of the project. So for a budget shift of 200,000, I would surely discuss this with your project advisor. And maybe it's also necessary to provide some extra explanation for this in the reasons for change section. So as I said before, there is no strict upper limit, but the changes have to be reasonable and just to align the budget with actual spending during the implementation of the project according to what was approved in the application form. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, if not, please post another question in the chat box. I'd be happy to elaborate a bit more.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next one. Is a change between partners not always a major change?
Yes, you are correct here. So if you want to shift budget between two beneficiaries, you can either do this as part of a major change or as part of the final adjustment change. I'm not 100% sure if this is answering your question.
I think it is, Annemieke. I think the question here perhaps arises from what you have already covered in terms of we are changing budget between beneficiaries. Normally, that would be an SC decision in terms of a major change, but we have this flexibility incorporated into the final adjustment change. So I think that answers the question.
Good.
So, is a new letter of intent needed for partners in case of a budget decrease?
Thanks for your question, Martin. And no, this is not the case. So you only need to upload a new letter of intent in case the budget increases. As when the budget decreases, the full amount is already covered by the letter of intent. It's only needed for increased budgets.
Thank you so much. If we have had two major changes in the project, can we still do a final adjustment change of budget between beneficiaries?
Yes, this is the case, and this is, as Christophe said, one of the additional flexibility opportunities we offer. So yeah, in every project you can submit a final adjustment change regardless of how many changes you have already submitted during your project lifetime.
Exactly, thank you. What happens if we are underspent on the project after all the activities has been completed? How is this reported in the final adjustment change? Needs to balance after you have entered all of the change items?
I'm not sure if I understand. Do you understand the question, Christopher?
Yeah, so I think the question relates to the fact that if, as far as I've understood the question, if the entire project underspent on its budget, do they need a final adjustment change? Probably what we're going at here is, do they need to reduce the budget of of the project, or can they leave funds unspent, and what will happen?
Yeah, so as long as you're not overspending, you don't have to adjust anything really. You don't have to adjust the total project budget to be exactly in line with what you actually spent during the project. It is only if you're overspending when the final adjustment change becomes relevant.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? There must be one or two questions out there that haven't been answered yet.
I see some people are still typing. So
yeah. So let's take this one from Andy. If final adjustment change, I like that you make use of the shortening of the title the same way as we do. Thank you so much.
a long word, yeah, I can agree.
Yeah, exactly. If a final adjustment change shift budget between beneficiaries, does there need to be a change to the shared cost calculations to reflect the new final budget positions? And should this be reapplied to shared cost already paid? That's a really good question, and I think Mika will just jump on this one. In terms of share cost, we are talking in this context, at least, we are talking about your internal arrangements. So this is actually relatively easy for us to answer, and perhaps it creates more work for you. But it's something that you have to sort out internally. So if you shift budget from one beneficiary to another, does this have any influence on your shared cost arrangements? And if it does, how are you then going to sort it out? And remember, the majority of our projects, they have covered shared cost arrangements in their partnership agreement. So we're not asking you to submit and update the partnership agreement, but at least that would be your starting point for figuring out where are we and do we need to have any changes made to our arrangements. I hope, Andy, this answers your questions. If not, let us know.
All right. I don't see any other questions anymore. See a lot of positive responses in the chat box, so I'm happy to see that. And this actually brings us to the end of this webinar. And I would like to thank you very much for joining this webinar. If you have any additional questions that pop up after this webinar, there are two ways actually to get in touch with us. We have this survey, which will come into your screen after we close the webinar. So this will give you an opportunity to enter some questions, and we will definitely follow up on those questions. And you can also get in touch with your project advisor or send an email to me. You can see my email address in the screen. Please also stay tuned for the next webinar next week, Thursday, the 25th of June, which will be hosted by my colleagues Sophie Vogvang and Lise Espersen, and which is on communications and putting your project in the spotlight. So you can now register for this webinar on our website, so please take a look there. And it's also always recommended to follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter to stay up to date on our last updates. Well, again, thank you very much for joining. We were very happy to have you here, and we hope to see you back in one of our next webinars. And please remember to don't close the window because the survey will now pop up. Okay, see you next time.
Bye-bye.